And speaking about this topic will be Aram Naraguzian at CSIS, who knows so much about the Lebanese army. He actually consults with the Lebanese army about itself. And David Schenker over at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, who designed the initial aid package to Lebanon back in 2005, 2006. So I hope you can join us on March 30th. In the meantime, please join me in welcoming Riad al Khouri.
Thank you, Kate. Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to introduce myself in a slightly different way before I begin talking, to give you an idea, first of all, what to listen to, and then when you feel a gap or a shortcoming, to understand it, and finally to help you ask the questions after I finish talking. I am a generalist. I have 2 degrees in economics. I've taught economics. I do economic research. I'm an economist. Jean-Paul Sartre once said that France is the only country in the world where in the old days they used to have people's professions in the passport. France is the only country in the world where people put intellectual as their profession in the passport. I like to think of myself as an intellectual. Intellectual not being somebody who's cool, but an intellectual, somebody literally who earns his living by working with his brain as opposed to working with his hands, which can include dentists as well as carpenters, or working with his legs like a basketball player or something like that. So, yes, I'm an economist, but my forte is looking at a wide range of issues over a fairly wide range of territory, in this case, the Arab world. So if I had to describe myself, I would say I am a development economist, specializing in the Middle East region. The Middle East region, of course, is more than the Arab world. And I cannot say I'm an expert on Iran or on Israel, although I know a little bit about them. Having said that, I want to start by looking at the deep background to the subject in terms of history. I want to say a few words about the origins of the modern Middle East, and then I'm going to talk about the current economic situation in the region, and then I will say a few words about each of Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Kurdistan, and then wrap it up, hopefully, in about 25 minutes or so. The modern Middle East was, as most of you here know, because this is the Middle East Institute, this is not the Outer Mongolia Institute, and indeed it is not the University of Michigan, where I gave this talk last week, or Case Western University, where I gave this talk on Tuesday, where people are extremely bright and very well informed about other issues, but not about the Middle East. So if I'm talking a little bit about things that you already know, you'll have to excuse me. I'll try not to talk down to you. The Middle East region, as we know today, was created in 1920 by the so-called San Remo Agreement, which was the stepdaughter of the Sykes-Picot Treaty. You're all familiar with that. The Sykes-Picot Treaty was famously described by an Arab writer named George Antonius in a very interesting book called The Arab Awakening, published in 1939, as a shocking document. And I quote verbatim his words, a shocking document. And I cannot quote verbatim the sentence after that, but what he says in essence is that the Sykes-Picot Treaty was the product of greed and stupidity. And I think those are the words that should be carved on the tombstones of Donald Rumsfeld, George W. Bush, and others who engaged in this really rather pathetic exercise in Iraq, and whose legacy is now with us in the engagement or in the thoughts of engagement by some people of similar exercises in other parts of the region. A very long story, but as I said, I need to set the stage for my talk. The relevance of what I just said to my specific talk here today is that the Middle East today is a state system that is very similar to what most of you here are Americans, some of you aren't. Most of you Americans here had in the years between the Battle of Yorktown, which I think was 1781, and the Constitution of the United States, which was 1789, something called the Articles of Confederation, which were a bit of a joke, which included a tariff and customs post on the Hudson River. if you wanted to go from New York to New Jersey. I grew up in New York, so most of the examples of Americana I give people are New Yorker. It included the complete lack of coordination among these different states. At the time, there were 13 of them, in terms of economics, but also in other terms. The Arab world is a little bit like that. Now, whether we will see a 1789 with a constitution is another story. I am personally much more hopeful now than I was 25 or 50 years ago. I say 50 years ago, I'm not that old, but I like to think that I was an early bloomer in terms of interest in politics and economics. I'm personally more hopeful now because the Arab nationalism that was based on emotions and feelings of the 1950s and 1960s is now being replaced by WTO-style globalizing economic integration among the different states of the region. This is happening in some cases as a result of state decrees and treaties and so forth. In other cases, it's guys and girls voting with their feet, moving from one country to another to do business, to sell things as tourists and so forth. So in the modern Middle East today, we have 22 Arab countries, that is to say countries members of the Arab League. You say what you will about the Arab League. The Arab League provides a definition of what the Arab world is, and my topic today is the Arab world. B, you have other countries, including Israel, including Iran. In the old days, we used to include Cyprus in the Middle East and Turkey in the Middle East. They are now either members of or candidate members to enter the European Union, so they're not really part of the Middle East, but they are, as I will make clear in a few minutes regarding the case of Turkey. Within this state system, we have economies. So that today, unlike the situation 100 years ago, the economies of Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, etc., are discrete entities with more or less restrictive tariffs and other measures that form a national boundary, not just in the physical sense of a guy standing near a fence with a little rubber stamp that he puts in your passport, but in the moral sense of people feeling different about things like business, private enterprise, the role of the state, corruption, and other stuff. Within this system, there are now several economies that are in very deep trouble. Now, the most startling and high profile of these troubled economies is Dubai. Dubai, as most of you know here, is not a sovereign state. It is part of the only federation in the Arab world. I should correct myself and say that there is another federal entity in the Arab world, and that is Kurdistan. But it is not exactly part of an Iraqi federation, such that all the regions of Iraq are federal. Some of you here, I believe, are from the KRG office in Washington, and I'd be very interested to hear your views on this as soon as I stop talking. Don't get excited and interrupt me. Dubai is in very serious trouble. An announcement was made yesterday about the Dubai government bailing out the so-called Nakheel company, which is a large property developer. They developed this crazy thing called the Palm, and then they had another project called the World, and these are Disney-ish. These are kind of cartoonish projects that nevertheless involved a lot of money.